Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a wine from 2018 from the left bank of Bordeaux, from the Médoc. This is Le Petit Ducru from Ducru-Beaucaillou. As I say, 2018 vintage, and it's in a half bottle there. Now, Ducru-Beaucaillou, almost for most commentators, be one of the top 3 or 4 chateau from Saint Julien. It's a deuxième cru, a second growth. Saint Julien has no first growths, unlike Pauillac or Margaux, but there are plenty of very good seconds, and as I say, Ducru-Beaucaillou probably up there amongst the top ones. The estate has something like about sort of 70 hectares of vines, about 50 of which lie between the chateau, which is at the southern end of Saint Julien, and to the right of the D2 as you drive north. So the best portion of their vineyards lies on really deep gravel beds between that chateau and the Gironde. So the depth of this gravel, the fact that there's quite a lot of quartz in it, making sure that it's quite sort of free draining, doesn't have particularly high fertility, and it's a great place for grapes to grow because it's got fantastic drainage. The estate has a long history, actually but more recently it was bought in 1941 by the Borry family, and today, since 2003 at any rate, Bruno Borry runs the estate, and Bruno has worked really hard over the last 20 years to really bring the estate back to top form. Part of that approach has been to declassify a lot of the first wine, to produce less wine, and to sell some of it off as other cuvées. As a result, they've got a sort of I find at any rate, a slightly confusing product range. I mean, obviously you have the Grand Vin, the first wine, Ducru-Beaucaillou, but below that they have a wine called Le Croix de Beaucaillou, the cross. Now, most people regard that as being a second wine. Certainly in the pecking order it is second behind Ducru-Beaucaillou, but actually that's not a true second wine, in terms of that traditionally the second wine of a chateau would be wine that had been destined for the first wine but had been declassified at the blending stage, whereas actually this comes from a plot of vines slightly further inland, something about 16 hectares worth, so quite a sizable plot of vines near Chateau Talbot. So perhaps not quite as good a terroir, but nonetheless worthy of creating as its own wine. So that is regarded as being the second wine, although it's not technically a second wine. Now, this wine, Le Petit Ducru, is seen as a third wine, it being third in the pecking order. Certainly price-wise it will be. This is more sort of the idea of a second wine, as it were, in that a portion of the wine in here, I believe, is declassified wine from Ducru-Beaucaillou. However, the Borry family used to own a property that they called Lalande Borry, or actually, I mean, I say property, actually it's a sort of a brand, because it was made from some of the vines within Ducru-Beaucaillou's vineyards, although a portion of that was actually some vines that they'd bought from Château Lagrange, another class growth in Saint Julien, that actually lie outside the boundaries of Saint Julien. But because historically they'd been included in one of the estates when that estate was classified, they're still entitled to be included in either Ducru-Beaucaillou itself, or it used to be allowed to be included in Lalande Borry, and that's what this wine what became this wine, Le Petit Ducru. So you can no longer get more vintages since 2019 of Lalande Borry. Le Petit Ducru took over from that. So it's partially fruit used to make this wine, partially coming from that section of Médoc vines that were bought from Chateau Lagrange, and I believe the balance coming from wines that have been declassified from the Grand Vin. Other differences you'll see is that, I mean, in terms of the blend of this is 60% Merlot and 40% Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, in most years, Ducru-Beaucaillou is somewhere in the region of 90% Cabernet Sauvignon with tiny amounts of Merlot, maybe a little Petit Verdot, but they've been pulling back on that recently. So it's a very different blend. I mean, the Merlot, rounder, richer, softer, more forward, so not a wine for quite as long at aging. And also, as far as the winemaking is concerned, there's the wine probably spends less time in oak, and that oak probably has a lower proportion of new oak. They say about 40% new oak for this, which is probably less than Ducru-Beaucaillou gets itself. But anyway, let's have a look at the wine and see what we make of it. I mean, to start with, that has got a lovely depth of colour. I mean, it really is deep dark, it's intense, and I really can't see my hand through that wine as I look down at the stem of the glass. The nature of the colour is a sort of dark ruby with a slightly sort of purple red rim, and notably, as I swirl the glass, the pigmentation sort of seems to hold to the glass somewhat there as well, so there's quite a depth of pigment there. Let's have a look at the aroma, shall we? The aromas are ripe, but there's a freshness to them as well. There's almost a sort of a dark, dark red to black plum note, so that sort of rich plum, damson, bullace. There's a sort of slightly chocolatey tone. There's slight hints of prune over ripeness, but only very slight. Much more sort of fresh, almost sort of slightly leafy touches, although not strongly so. In fact, at the end of the aromas, what I'm getting is a lovely whiff of blackcurrant, of pure cassis, which is getting much more sort of much more typical for Saint Julien. So let's have a taste, shall we? It's a rich, mouth-filling wine with plenty of tannins. The alcohol seems relatively warming. It's 14.5%, so that's not surprising. The tannins are fine. They're quite grainy. They've got good grip. They're slightly drying, but there's a sort of a suppleness that's stopping that from being harsh, and there's a slightly soft, almost milky texture at some stage that's rounding that a bit. The fruit has a richness. I suppose you have notes of sort of really ripe black cherry, that sort of juicy note there. Again, dark plum prune, dark plums, bullace, damson, and those sorts of things. And the sort of the fine texture of the tannins is giving us sort of a velvetiness that's almost like a sort of a plum skin or something like that. I'm not getting the sort of lifted, fresh, blackcurranty note, although there's some nice freshness here. It's not quite that piquantly fresh. As I say, the alcohol's in balance. There's quite a nice length to the wine. Certainly I'm getting that sort of both the velvety texture and some lovely deep, almost sort of purple fruit coming from those sort of dark plum aromas that are in there. Structure's fairly big, but it's not a heavy wine. It's got some freshness at the end. I don't think it's a wine that needs to be kept for a long time. It's supple, and it's juicy, and it's approachable now. If you were to keep it for 4 or 5 years, the tannins would soften, and there's a nice freshness and bite in terms of sort of acidity and tannic structure to give it a reasonable amount of time to age. I mean, 2018 is a really good vintage. You know, slightly marred at the beginning by a wet spring and uneven flowering, but in the rest of the year there was a drought that made up for it. So the concentration that you're seeing both in the colour and the aroma and the weight and the palate is typical of that. So I think that's a really nice wine. I mean, obviously it depends on the price, but that's Le Petit Ducru from Ducru-Beaucaillou in Saint Julien. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll join us again soon. Bye now.